I'm really delighted today to have a conversation with some of the most committed and high-impact philanthropists and funders in the whole world of journalism, and I mean that quite literally. We'll hear from Jim, from Lolly, from Michelle, and from Brianna. Shortly, each funder has different priorities, although they have journalism in common. Each has different capital sources, a single family, the sale of a great newspaper chain, philanthropy that came out of the automobile industry, and AJP, which is kind of a philanthropy of philanthropies. They each are actually media operators more so than philanthropists by background, and I'll mention each of their backgrounds when I introduce them. But they've each had either operating backgrounds in radio, television, digital, or newspapers, and spent much more of their time as practitioners like all of us rather than philanthropists. So they've come to philanthropy actually later in their careers. And because of that, I think there's an empathy and a thoughtfulness and a willingness to partner, having been on the other side of the table, that really shines through. And they're most particularly focused on equity, sustainability, and the survivability of local news. So I'm gonna ask each of you to talk about your priorities, your programming philosophy, and so forth. But first, I just wanted to kind of ask for a show of hands. How many in this room have been funded by Knight, Ford, Arnold, AJP, or Lenfest in some way, shape, or form? That's about half or more. How many have applied for funding and been turned down? About half or more, and some of the same people. So
don't give up. That's the key to philanthropy.
That's going to be one of our themes as well. I'd like you each to start with a kind of anecdotal lead, which is one thing, maybe maximum two things that you have funded who are actually represented in the room today, and why that's emblematic of your larger priorities. And Lolly, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Who's here that kind of demonstrates what you most want to do and what you're most focused on recently?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and for the opportunity to speak on this. I don't know if they're represented in the room at this moment, but one of the organizations that is funded by Ford and was funded last year is Epicenter. I think some of you were in this room yesterday when Mitra Khalida was talking about the fuel, the history, and what really drove her to start Epicenter, which is a news organization that really translates information for historically marginalized residents in Queens, New York. And what they do is they are able to take news, and rather than focus on the writing, rather than focus on the layout, rather than focus on how it is projected to the public, they're able to translate it into action items for the people in their community. What they found during the pandemic was that residents were scrambling, particularly those who come from historically marginalized backgrounds, who may not have English as a first language, who may be struggling with issues of documentation, who were considered essential workers. They needed information about where to go get a COVID shot, where they could go get a vaccine, where they could turn for resources if they were being laid off from work, where they could file for unemployment. And so they kind of needed to be connected to the direct information on not just what to do, but how to do it. That organization is important to Ford in part because the journalism portfolio's mission is to invest in news and storytelling organizations that serve historically marginalized communities that have been historically overlooked both by philanthropy and by the mainstream media.
Thank you so much. There's a number of themes that were very much alive in Sarah Alvarez's conversation this morning, what we derisively used to call news you can use, but actual civic information that is of use to communities first and foremost and has real results. So thank you for that. Apropos of my comment about philanthropists who come from operating backgrounds and bring that empathy and that sense of partnership, Lolly had a background as 15 years, I think, as a reporter of of great note at the Chicago Tribune, covering housing, covering government, covering youth culture, covering minority communities, and then was at the Field Foundation doing essentially what you do at the Ford Foundation there. She also has the coolest title up here, Program Officer, Creativity and Free Expression. So,
Well,
like
the creativity and free expression part is the department that houses the journalism portfolio. And my colleagues have a lot more cooler work investing in the creative space. If I can add just a little, because you gave a little bit of detail about my background, one of my core missions as a reporter was to be able to identify stories and communities that, again, that I felt were being overlooked, that were being dismissed, and sometimes didn't rise to the surface. And so in many ways, that work translates into what I do now in funding, is in identifying the news and storytelling organizations that serve those communities in the many ways that those communities have news and information gaps.
oh, thank you for that. Michelle, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, is the Vice President of Portfolio Success at HAP, and embedded in that title is the notion that funders are interested in your success and are measured by your success, so this is a partnership rather than a kind of one-way street. Your background, as I understand, is you were at Campbell Ewald, which is a leading Detroit-based advertising agency known for its work in automotive, but you're a brand marketer, and then you were general manager of WDET Detroit. So you've been on the business side and helping generate revenue and brand awareness throughout your career. And I'm going to ask in a moment how you do that for AJP.
Sure.
But one example or two, I know you have many flowers
So many.
you're watering in this room.
Thank you. So it's funny, when I joined AJP, I remember talking to John Thornton, one of our founders, and someone had asked me, like, well, the Texas Tribune and Chalkbeat, right? Those are our two co-founders, built those organizations. Are there other models out there? I'm like, geez, I hope so. And so we've made a lot of investments in organizations that are state house focused, accountability focused, seeing like building on, watching VT Digger grow, and then now like an organization like Montana Free Press that's newer, kind of building on those learnings and reimagining what a statewide organization can do. We've also invested in what we kind of call multi-locals, so similar to Chalkbeat, organizations that are national, but focusing on local strategies. But I think what drew me to the work was organizations like City Bureau and Outlier, Media, MLK 50, organization, Documented, Sahan Journal, so many of them out here, who are really reimagining what journalism is, who it's for, how it's produced, how it's delivered, and who produces it, and are meeting needs that traditional media had not met before. So there's a sustainability question and a growth question, but their approach is so rooted in understanding and building trust and empowering their communities. And we've seen through our whole portfolio, as we make additional investments, how much that's influencing the work of other organizations that we support. And so I think that's what really drew me to this. I think it's really emblematic of kind of the shift in this field that needs to happen as we've invested in new organizations that we're helping launch, like our work in Ohio, the launch of Signal Cleveland. Like, it was based on understanding community information needs. There's a Documenters program based in Cleveland. There's the multi-locals, the Marshall Project, Chalkbeat are having collaborations there, so highly collaborative, responsive to community needs, and really thinking about who's not been served and what's the role that a local news organization can play in this community. I think no matter what models we continue to invest in, that's a through line that we look for, and we think it's critical to your ability to succeed and be sustainable.
And closest to home, there's a new startup to be launched early next year, perhaps, in Houston, correct?
Yes.
And how do you decide whether to do a flat-footed startup or to bet on Spotlight PA, where we work together?
Yeah, so I work, primarily I work with organizations who already exist in some form. So when I'm involved in our decision-making about grants and supporting those organizations, we're looking at organizations at various stages who already exist and how we can help them grow. But I think what's been interesting watching with our startups team is it all starts with research. So we're going in, a lot of times there's interest and energy in a community. There's philanthropists who want to see a change. They recognize it, or they're coming to us and saying, we want to understand what the gaps are here. So we really root it in understanding not just who are the players currently in that ecosystem, what are they doing, but also what are the community's needs. And I think Houston's interesting because people think, well, there's all this media here. It's like, but what are the actual gaps that the media is not meeting? What do community members actually need? And being able to show philanthropy that even if you think there's all these people doing this work, and it's true, there's still gaps. And Houston's huge. It's a very complicated community. And so there were still a lot of gaps in Houston. And so our work is driven by that, and we look for where there's energy and kind of also following the lead in some cases of who's already there. It's very collaborative. All the startups that we've been involved in launching, as I mentioned earlier, not just with our portfolio of existing organizations, but also being really collaborative and additive to that ecosystem.
So Houston was a reported fundraise of $22 million,
Yeah.
partly from Arnold,
Yeah.
Kindler, and the Houston Foundation. How much of that was AJP? Or you were kind of the coordinating catalytic
What do you
factor?
mean, how much of it? Like, how much credit should we take for that happening? I think that we play, I think what's a unique role with AJP is we do about what we call movement building. So some of that's national and getting more philanthropy to understand that local news is a priority. But in local communities, too, being able to play the role of convening, doing the research, showing a path forward, and helping build this coalition of funders locally and nationally to feel very confident and making really big bets.
As you know, you self-identify as a venture philanthropy.
Yeah.
That's what venture capitalists do. They put
do.
together clubs
Yeah.
of investors, and somebody has to lead. So you do it well. Speaking of Arnold, I'll turn to Rhiannon. You are also a local news person by background, on the order of 10 years at the Houston Chronicle, other local titles covering energy, healthcare, et cetera. Then we're in healthcare communications for a large hospital network. And I'm curious what drew you back into the field of journalism, first of all, and then one or two examples of things that illustrate the point of what Arnold is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. I came back to journalism because it is my first true love. So I was in healthcare communications because, like many people out there, I was a journalist for many years. My husband was also a journalist. It became really unsustainable to sort of figure out how to have a family and a journalism career for both of us at the same time. So I got out first, went into healthcare communications because I was a healthcare reporter.
Right.
And then when a job position opened up at Arnold Ventures, where they do a lot of healthcare policy, I went to work there initially to do healthcare communications for them on the policy side of the equation. And then Jeff Cohen, who I think many of you out in the audience know, then recruited me onto the journalism portfolio, and I couldn't say no because it's, the chance of a lifetime to give back to an industry who, made me who I am today. I think that's a good segue into what Arnold Ventures does. Journalism is a very small piece of our philanthropy overall at the organization. It's primarily a criminal justice foundation, a healthcare foundation. We're growing in other areas, higher education, affordable housing, all of that. But the Arnolds had long given to journalism because they just genuinely care about journalism as sort of the critical infrastructure to safeguard democracy. So for many years, they were just giving, out of their own pocket as a personal gift. And then when Jeff, who's my partner on their portfolio, came on, he helped kind of codify it into more of a strategy. There are so many of our grantees out there, and it's been really fun to be here because I've only seen people in Zoom boxes for the past year, so to get a chance to meet people face to face is really thrilling. We have the Texas Tribune, Cal Matters, Montana Free Press. One of our newest grantees, the Flatwater Free Press, is here, and I'm so thrilled.
This is from Omaha, Nebraska, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the through line there for us is these are all outlets that are producing high quality, high impact, independent journalism that is free and accessible for all. So we really insist that the journalism is available to anyone who wants to read it and that there's a spirit of collaboration there. We don't have much of a strategy when it comes to funding, but we do kind of tend to stay in three lanes that get at the Arnold's desire to fund journalism that ultimately drives policy change, because that's what we're here for as a philanthropy, is to maximize opportunity and minimize injustice. So we fund State House Capital Shops, which are all of the grantees I've listed above, investigative reporting, and then issue-specific reporting that maps against some of the broader interests of the foundation.
And John Arnold was or is a hedge fund guy or a oil and gas trader, and very
energy trader.
very data-driven, very evidence-based, and also least by my standards, very young. They're in their 40s still, or?
They are in their 40s. We still go in front of them to take all of our grants. We sit in the boardroom across the table for them and tell them how we're going to spend their money. And it's, I'm always sweating underneath my jacket.
At the Knight Foundation, there are these oil paintings of the Knight brothers, and Jim has to go before them from time to time as well. Thank you for that. I'll come back to some of those priorities and really appreciate it. Jim Brady. Jim, I think, is best known to me as an entrepreneur. We worked together, and I was an investor in Billy Penn, which exited successfully to WHYY in Philadelphia. He has a background with the Washington Post, with the artist formerly known as Digital First Media, which is now Alden Global, helping coordinate kind of a group-wide consolidation of news. He was an ombudsman, as I understand, at ESPN. And I want to dig in most on your entrepreneurial perspective, because I think you bring that very much to the Knight Foundation, having, again, been on the other side of the table, asking for money, and also knowing what you wished you had when you were launching Billy Penn that now exists off the shelf and cost us a lot of money at the time. So with that backdrop, maybe one or two priorities for this room or in this room.
Sure. I mean, one thing I learned for sure when starting Billy Penn is it seemed crazy to me that I was making all of these decisions about platform and about payroll and about legal and insurance and the same decisions everybody in this room has had to make as they're growing their own businesses as well. So, excuse me, one of our priorities and my priorities in the job has been to try to figure out how to build the infrastructure of journalism and try to provide shared services and systems that organizations can plug into without having to figure all these things out on their own. So we've done a number of those. One of those I'll mention, even though they're not in the room, but this could benefit lots of people in this room. There's something called ProJourn, which is a pro bono legal network that we're partnering with, that we funded with Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, and also partnering with Microsoft and Davis Wright Tremaine. And that's now providing pro bono legal support, pre-pub review, and public records access requests. So if there are people in the room who run into that wall where you're trying to decide, should I publish this story and put myself at immense legal risk, understand that ProJourn is out there and RCFP is out there to help you in that effort. So if anybody has any questions on that, let me know. We just announced that grant about 3 weeks ago. We're trying to expand into as many states as possible as quickly as we can, and we've already added a bunch of law firms around the country that are willing to provide pro bono support in addition to the ones I mentioned. So that, we're looking at things like that kind of across the ecosystem, because it just has to be easier for people in this room to get connected to systems and to people and to services that they need to run their business. It's a little bit too much everybody figuring it out on their own at this point. We're too late in the digital game for this to be such a kind of still a scavenger hunt in a lot of ways. The second thing I'll mention that we've been focused on, and Knight's been focused on this for a long time, and I'm continuing that focus, is on sustainability. That all of the priorities of journalism, all of the priorities of serving communities and holding powerful people accountable, they're hard to attain if you can't run your actual business, if you don't have enough money to operate. So we're continuing to focus a lot on that. One grant I'll mention that we're really proud of is the Knight LMA Bloom Lab, which we announced earlier this year, which is an effort to help 26 Black publishers make the digital transformation and also reimagine the technology back end and the business model.
These are mostly for profits, right?
Mostly for profits, yes. In fact, almost at this point, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's only almost all for profits. And there'll be 26 organizations we'll work with. 18 have been named. The second cohort was just named last week. But what's great about that is it's allowing us to take organizations that are, in most cases, third, fourth, fifth generation owned publications that, like all publications, struggle through the digital transformation and get them on a path to sustainability and the ability to serve communities that haven't been well served by other segments of media. So those are two things, but sustainability and scalability are two things that we are heavily focused on. And I think I'll just sum up the sustainability strategy by saying, it's hard for any funder, even one with the assets that Knight has, to be in the business of solving an individual problem for an individual publisher, because there are a lot of publishers and there are a lot of problems. And so looking at ways to try to solve it at scale by legal services, content management systems, we're going to continue to work on that so that people in this room can take advantage of a lot of those systems, if not directly through an actual grant, but being able to plug into it via, sort of ancillary grant.
Thank you very much. I'm going to eat my own cooking just very briefly here and tell you what our priorities are at Lenfest. We are a modest-sized funder and a provider of infrastructure services to grow the field as a whole in local news. The entire focus of Jerry Lenfest's gift to us was local news sustainability. So that's kind of our mission in a word. We work with Arnold and AJP on Spotlight PA, which is statewide accountability journalism nonprofit. We own the for-profit Philadelphia Inquirer and worked hard to make it more equitable, more reflective of its community, and more sustainable as a digital business. And we operate a collection of communities of practice that we invite you all to join if you haven't already. The News Philanthropy Network, which is really about advancement people and money raisers, often the CEO or the editor-in-chief, getting together. There are 1,700 people exchanging insight and thoughts in that group. We have the statewide news collective, which we're up to 35 states of 50. We're seeking all 50 who serve mainly nonprofits serving the state as a whole, started by the Texas Tribune and Spotlight PA and RevLab and the Lenfest Institute. And we have a new community of practice about audience development and community engagement that we took over from the City University of New York. And it has the New York Times and ProPublica and many others already in it. So we'll broadcast all that out to you. The goal of all this is to grow the field and to provide low-cost infrastructure that helps everybody at the same time. That's our mission. Some of you, I think most of you, have been on the other side of the table in asking for funding. I'd love to know what your advice is to those who ask you for funds. I heard as we were getting up here, don't give up. Maybe Lolly, you can start with that. What's the way in the door at a kind of big institution like the Ford Foundation, and how does one not get discouraged the third or fourth time?
Yeah, and I would say don't give up. But also, you prepped us and told us that this question was coming, and it's such a big question and one that has so many dimensions. One, you have to build some relationship with funders and know which funders are cohesive with your own mission that align with the work that you do. I found when I reflect back, so before I joined Ford, I was at the Field Foundation in Chicago, and the portfolio that I managed there also gave grants to Chicago media organizations. What some people didn't know is that portfolio was funded by larger foundations like Ford and like the MacArthur Foundation. So I was in the same or a similar position as many of you are in of having to go out and ask funders for support in order to then translate those funds to smaller media organizations in our Chicago media ecosystem. And when I reflect back on that time, I realized that I spent a lot of time staring at closed doors when I could have spent more time walking through the open ones. And what I mean is that at the time, Ford Foundation was already funding the Field Foundation. And so I felt like, well, we already got them. I don't have to talk to them. All I gotta do is turn in my report. I need to go talk to Arnold. I need to figure out who I could talk to at night. I need to figure out when I could have been cultivating a deeper and more meaningful relationship with the people who were already aligned and who have already given me a vote of confidence. And so I find that that's one of the keys. And I found one of the organizations, in fact, that I work with at the Ford Foundation. When I first came to Ford and inherited the portfolio, there was this particular organization in the South that we was working with, and they found themselves in some trouble. And so, as a result of some of the troubles that they were having with management and some of the troubles that they were having with staff and actually being productive, I said, well, we need to start meeting a lot sooner, a lot more often, and I need to be more deeply involved in the evolution of this organization. And so, in some ways, it was almost hand-holding this organization to try to make sure that they were able to meet some of their benchmarks. Well, shortly after we started having conversations, maybe 3 months in, they came to me and they said, we took your advice and we started talking to people who were already our donors. And it turns out one of our donors is a millionaire. He really liked our content, and so he's going to invest more deeply into our work. So we don't think we need to talk to you anymore. This is a person who lives in their community, who's right there in their backyard, who had already given money at the beginning of their foundation, right? Who had already given his vote of confidence. All they needed to do was go back and cultivate a relationship, and then they found out that they had a source that was even more generous than the Ford Foundation.
Sort of hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight, right? And so when I think back and when I reflect, I think about all those relationships that I skipped over, all those people who had given their vote of confidence to the Field Foundation already, because I was so focused on, for me, it was Open Society Foundation. I was like, does anybody know? Can somebody call Mackenzie? Tell her to come through for me. But if I could look back now, I would have deepened those relationships with the MacArthur Foundation, which had already invested in the Field Foundation. I would have deepen the relationship with the Ford Foundation.
Advice. Jim, you pitched a lot of people on Billy Penn and other activities. What did you learn from that, and how does that inform how you work with people now?
I learned a lot. I mean, I guess I would have a tip, but because I know there are both nonprofits and for-profits in the room, I'd give a tip for each.
Right.
For for-profits, this is going to sound like a strange tip, but when you're trying to pitch organizations to invest in your company, don't be a journalist. And what I mean by that is when I was trying to pitch Billy Penn the first couple of times, I would say things like 75% of our audience are millennials. I mean, they're not all in Philadelphia, and it's like, why am I telling both sides of my own story? I'm trying to raise money here. I am trying to tell the best story I can.
I thought you meant don't admit that you're a journalist.
Right, it's like, just tell the story. It's the investor's job. It's the funder's job to ask hard questions. You don't have to go confess weaknesses to people who you're trying to raise money from. It's not a good idea. So luckily I had a guy with me the first time I pitched, and he came out and said, please stop doing that. Stop saying something good and then immediately diluting it with another fact. You tell the best facts you have and let them ask the hard questions. So be careful of the tendency to want to, both sides of your own pitch. And on the nonprofit side, I think just at night I can say after a year, just be honest if you're coming to ask for money. Like, that's our job. Our job is to assess grants and give away money. We're not offended if you're coming to ask for money. That's what we're here for. But you do get a lot of like, I'm not looking for money, I just want some advice. And you're 10 minutes into the advice call and somebody's asking for money. And it does kind of it's a little annoying. It's like, just say you're looking for money, it's okay. And that backdoor thing is like, you would have gotten the call anyway. So just say you're looking for funds if that's what you're looking for, because it just doesn't get the relationship off on the best foot when you feel like somebody kind of got the call under some false pretense when you kind of knew they were going to ask for money at some point. So I think, but in terms of advice, that's what I would, and also just be yourself and just be, I think sometimes people contort themselves. They do so much research on who they're pitching that they try to like kind of speak to all of their priorities, even if what they're doing isn't directly aimed at that. And you can't do that, because then you end up in a relationship that's not going to be good for anybody. So just stay true to your pitch. If somebody says, sounds great, but it's not what we do, you're better off than contorting yourself to get money from somebody who's going to expect something different than what you told them in the pitch meeting. So just be consistent.
I'll just jump in and say we are looking for money, and
fine by me.
I'll tell you,
We're not offended by that.
Both sides of the story, we're doing great work, and on the other hand, we're doing really great work. So,
well done.
what was something you said to me at one point that I think is worth sharing, that a quick no rather than a tortured analysis by a funder is the one thing that they don't make more of is time, and organizations at this stage and this size I'm thinking of the average Lion newsroom, their time is the most precious commodity. And I think you've been all of these funders have been very good at saying, this is for us, this is not for us, come back next year, that kind of thing. Speaking of time, we have about 20 minutes left and would love to take questions and comments. I'm sure there are a lot of them. So why don't you go to the mic, and I would just ask that you tell us who you are and where you're from.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Jared Smith. We've been publishing for 4 years. We're members of the Press Association. We distribute our content free to any news organization in Colorado that wants it, and we also post our content every week on AP StoryShare. So I have 2 questions for you, and I'm probably, what do you do when you like cut off your nose to spite your face? That's what I'm getting ready to do, so bear with me. This question has been driving me nuts for years. I worked at the Rocky Mountain News when they shut us down in 2009. The Knight Foundation, all of these beautiful philanthropic organizations were out there trying to figure out a way to help us. And so I would suspect that since 2009, philanthropy has put in tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the news business, from the Google News Initiative to the Knight Foundation to Facebook, whatever. Big, big, big money. Always big press releases when that kind of big money. So my question to you guys is, are we seeing an upturn in the number of reporters on the ground?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to politely go to the next question when we answer this one, rather than give you a second one, just because we have so many people.
That's okay.
But,
so you're not going to answer the question?
No, we will answer the question. Let's make each of these questions brief question, brief answer, jump ball, anybody.
So I can't answer the across the field question, but I can tell you, at least with AJP's investments, when we look at our portfolio right now, we see an average of almost 70% growth in the first year, and a 5-10 return on investment by the end of the grant. But the thing that a lot of people look at and think, is it just revenue? It's like, no, but our portfolio, since our founding, has now brought on over 300 editorial positions in their newsroom. So that's 300 positions that would not have been funded potentially before, and it's not just driven by our grants, it's our grants and our support enabling them to continue to fundraise to grow their newsrooms. So I think that investment in business and revenue capacity to enable organizations to keep growing and building their news gathering capacity is really critical and continues to be a key part of what we do. So we feel we're very much evaluated on whether that's working or not when we invest.
I think the numbers are actually down, continued. But the nonprofit news numbers and the State House news numbers, according to Pew, have begun to tick up. Question here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Vicki Collins. I'm also from Denver, and I am the publisher of Bucket List Community Cafe, which builds community by sharing our stories. Does it matter to you whether we're a nonprofit or an entrepreneurial organization? Our Bucket List Community Cafe, we consider ourselves journalism entrepreneurs, but I keep getting advice that we need to be a nonprofit to get funding. And I was wondering, it seems to me that many of you fund both, but does it matter one way or the other?
I'll take that really quickly. We are agnostic to business model. In fact, we're commercial people, and our founder made his money in for-profit cable. There are ways to get a fiscal sponsor.
Right.
LMA does this. We do this so that people can give to you on a tax-deductible basis, even though you're for-profit. If you sell with your mission, it shouldn't matter whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. Yeah.
I was just going to,
please.
completely agree. It does not matter to us. Obviously, the mechanism of funding a nonprofit is much cleaner, but we fund, either through a fiscal sponsor or through other programs like Report for America or the Sustainable Publishing System. So we're happy and want to fund for-profits because I think we feel like nonprofits and for-profits have to be part of the solution, both.
AJP is devoutly
AJP is
nonprofit.
nonprofit only.
Yeah, got it.
AJP is nonprofit only
Please.
for our investments.
Hi, I'm Maria Fernanda. I am from Costa Rica, from a local publication there. And
welcome.
Thank you. So my question is, most of our funding comes from international organizations, and some of them ask a lot of administrative work. And I was wondering if you had any advice for us to communicate these worries, because for a local, very small newsroom, it is very difficult sometimes to deal with so much workload. So if you had any advice on how to communicate these needs to them, because some of them, for some of them, we are the first newsroom. Most of them work in poverty or in other types of with other types of organizations, and for some of them, we are the first journalistic organization that they work for. So
Who would like to take that?
There's the question about how to convince funders to pay for more than programming costs to enable you to actually manage the grants and fundraise.
Yeah, and also how to communicate, and maybe not to.
And to create more burden with their
Because it's a lot of work, and it's also it's to adapt to their systems, right? To their administrative, bureaucratic systems sometimes. So how can you communicate these things to them?
I remember when I started at HAP, I was like, how do we reduce the burden? I was a grantee first, and then I just realized, wow, we're still creating a lot of burden, and like, what's worth it and what's not, and where can we simplify? And I think the more we hear from our grantees, like this isn't not enabling us to actually invest in doing this work, and I know you care about this work. And there's also, are they willing to invest in capacity to help you actually do the type of work, not just for their organization, but in general, because as you continue to generate revenue, there are going to be new expenses and time that have to go into, growing the revenue, administering it in your finances. So pushing them to see if that's a possibility. But I think be honest with them, and depending on your situation, like, can they be more flexible? What can they do to help you? Not have that completely take away from your ability to do the work that they are interested in funding as their priority.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't think it's unique to nonprofit news organizations.
Nope, not
I
at
think
all.
that's nonprofits in general.
Please.
Hi there, I'm Carrie Mitchell. I am the founder of Dallas Free Press. We work in historically redlined and disinvested communities in Dallas, Texas, 3 hours away. We hear the word sustainability a lot. It's actually in the title of this conference. And you tell us, whether journalism funders or other funders, we often hear we are looking for sustainability. What exactly are you looking for? Are we talking about staffing? Are we talking about budget? Are we talking about other funders? How do you assess that, either in conversation with nonprofits or in applications?
Well, I think sustainability is being able to, fund your own business in a repeatable fashion year after year. And that doesn't mean it all has to, some portion of that may be philanthropy, it probably will be for many nonprofits, but the idea is that you're building toward a point in which you don't necessarily need as much philanthropy or any philanthropy, because I think the way we look at, part of the reason we focus so much on sustainability is if we, did a $250,000 grant to you, we would like you to use that money to be able to build a business. You can hire your own reporters, and we can take that $250,000 next year and give it to the next you. So they're building a business somewhere else. So I think for us, we focus a lot on sustainability because it just has to be a focus. So we're always looking for, if it's, there are a lot of organizations that we have funded an audience development person or a revenue development person as opposed to funding a reporter, because if you get a really good development person, you can hire 3 reporters instead of the one you might get from us in a grant. So I think the idea is just building that business so that you're able to not need us as much, not need philanthropy as much.
I would say another thing with sustainability too is we think about like leadership structure. Who are you surrounded with? A lot of folks, it's just one person and you can't do everything. How are you thinking about building a board or an advisory committee? Like who are you surrounding yourself with, whether it's people you can hire or bring on as stakeholders? Seeing that you understand your community relevance is very critical to sustainability, which is why I was emphasizing the importance of understanding and having trust of your community and demonstrating that, because you're not going to be sustainable if you don't actually have relevance. And talent is a big thing. So we think about, yes, like you need to be able to generate revenue, but also how do you manage your growth? Who's around you? What kind of leadership and support are you surrounding yourself with to enable you to continue to grow in a way that you can sustain?
Please.
Hi, I'm Susan Smigelski-Acker with Virginia Peninsula Media in historic Yorktown, Virginia. And we have a big employer, Newport News Shipyard, and I'd like to hit them up for money for foundation. We are an LLC now. We're going to be switching over to a nonprofit in 2023. My fear is they're going to try to influence, because the shipyard has, it's the biggest employer, and it has a lot of influence in the area. And so my fear is that they're going to say, we didn't like that story you wrote about such and such, or something like that. So how is that approachable? Or how do I make it, put it across that I do not want their influence, other than, as far as like negative, or tell me that I shouldn't run something?
I'll take a shot. I think this is endemic to all news media, whether it was advertiser influence at a for-profit medium or donor influence at a nonprofit. And we are donor supported. The Philadelphia Inquirer is nonprofit owned, and we've never, ever, ever had someone try to Bigfoot us or even mention the notion of buying coverage. They know that it's completely off the table. We've also found that donors are relieved by that. If you tell them right up front, this absolutely, positively does not influence us, their friends can't then say, well, didn't you give a big gift to so-and-so? Can you have a word with them? So I think it's transparency and clarity and church and state, just like it's always been.
And I would just say, if you can get in the press release a quote from them saying they won't interfere, that's really nice too.
Yeah, we have at Ford, we have a number of small news organizations and storytelling groups that also have partners in the community. They may have investors that own businesses, and one of the things that they do is emphasize that they are an independent free press. And so when they are partnering with a local business or a local organization, emphasizing not just verbally, but even in the paperwork, that your investment is in this independent free newsroom, that this is not a newsletter for the United Way or for whatever organization that you're partnering with, that this is an investment in providing news and information for the community.
And to the extent that you can write that into the grant agreement, the editorial independence, add that and codify that into the grant agreement, I would do so. That way you do have it in writing and it's something you can go back to if you do get that request.
And if they push for you, then is the risk of losing the trust of your community worth the money that they might give you? I think, being really considerate about if that's a problem for them, then maybe you shouldn't take the investment.
Yeah, choose your donors. Good fences make good neighbors, as Robert Frost said. Please.
Hi, I'm Rosina Breen. I'm the new editor-in-chief and CEO at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. We do local to global journalism around topics including dirty money, the environment, community journalism. We're lucky to have a handful of US funders already, one of whom has said we need to acquire more US funding now, or believes that we should be confident enough to do that. So I'm really interested in your view around foreign nonprofits and what the best approach is. Is it, as Jim says, just to ask the question?
You have Gates Foundation funding and...
yeah, we have
right.
Gates, OSF, and also Logan Foundation.
Right. Do
funding.
any of you fund internationally? Ford does, right?
Yeah, Ford does fund internationally. The journalism portfolio, however, is really focused on the local news crisis in the United States. But because Ford is a global foundation and there are a number of other portfolios that have global interests, there is some narrative shift investments that are made through those portfolios. So, for example, we have a portfolio that is devoted to investments specifically in Africa. And so if it fit in that portfolio, there are some news and media organizations that are funded through it. But through the journalism portfolio itself, right now we're really focused on the local news crisis that is impacting the United States.
I was just going to say we are U.S. only.
Yeah, as we are. Please.
Hi, my name is Noe Magaña. I'm with Benito Link in California. We service about 60,000 people in a rural ag community. And we do a lot of town halls and candidate forums. And I was wondering, and also internships for high school and college age, which were like probably unfortunately, one of the few organizations that provides paid internships in our area. So I was wondering if there are any funding opportunities for public service events and also for internships.
Well, you had your mic up, so I thought.
I always put the mic up. I mean, I can't speak specifically in your community where where that might exist. And I think if you look, we were just talking about this like with different funders, being able to look and see like, are there people who are interested in like jobs and training education and like how you're like actually playing into that role. And if there are universities in the area, I think we've seen people that they're actually kind of jointly partnering with universities who have access to other forms of philanthropic funding. It's not something that like AJP directly, we specifically focus on investing in organizations. You might find individual donors or companies who are interested in sponsoring a program if you kind of like package it as something that they can be acknowledged around. I know that there's a lot of people who are interested in versions of like workforce training, but I'm not sure if anybody specifically comes to mind that you all can think of.
I would say that we're referred to as the unknown cousin. So a lot of Silicon Valley kind of don't know where we are, and we're like an hour away.
Okay.
So that's the challenge of reaching out to companies because they don't feel like our program would have an impact on them or the neighboring communities. Yes, that's the challenge.
Let's talk after this.
Please.
Hi, my name is Emily Sacker. I'm the founder and editor of a small, hyper-local site covering 2 small towns in the Hudson Valley, New York.
Daily Catch.
Thank you, Jim. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the funding landscape, the foundation funding landscape for hyper-local sites, and any advice you might have for papers like my own, of which I think there are many in this room.
So I have a home near your site. You produce content with great metabolism, and
Thank you.
And it's really terrific stuff. Red Hook, New York, is where the name The Daily Catch comes from, and Rhinebeck, New York, is the kind of available market. I spoke quite recently with a funder of ours and of yours, Don Kimmelman, who says he's giving you $10,000. He has a home nearby. I think hyper-local journalism is paid for by hyper-local people. Mm-hmm. So it's probably not the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation, right. Et cetera. But people that care deeply about those communities and are willing to put their money where their mouth is. I would keep it very local and interact in groups like this for learnings, probably more so than funding.
I would say, though, I don't want to, I mean, I do think a lot of the things we fund, you can take advantage of, whether we've been a longtime funder of Lion and of INN and of the Pro Bono Legal Network. So what we're trying to do is provide grants that allow hundreds of thousands of newsrooms to basically take advantage of a service or a tool. So I do think we can be beneficial. It's less likely to be direct because there are so many sites out there. But I think that's why we're aimed at that level of trying to be a provider of grants that allow you to tap into those services, maybe indirectly via a grant. I also wanted to say one thing too. I think it's great that all 4 of us are kind of have different philosophies up here and what we fund, because when you start stitching them all together, they cover large parts of the ecosystem. I mean, we are more focused on the sustainability and scalability thing, but it's great that there are people who are focused on funding really good journalism, because you need both of those for the system to work. If everybody here was focused on just funding good journalism and everybody up here was funding sustainability, I think there'd be gaps. But I think a lot of funders not on this stage right now really help bring a much more complete overall kind of portfolio to the funding journalism.
I apologize, we're out of time. I wanted to.
Can I?
Is it really quick?
Real quick.
Yeah.
Laura Lorick, Silicon Hills News here in Austin, Texas. Why aren't we suing Google? Eastern European Union has $8.1 billion worth of judgments against Google for doing antitrust violations. And the last lawsuit we brought in the United States was Microsoft in the 90s, when tech was complaining that Microsoft was the big dog, the big gorilla in town. So as journalism organizations, why aren't we getting together and fighting Google, Amazon, Apple, all the big tech now that has gobbled up all the ad dollars? And then we'd have plenty of money, millions, to seed journalism organizations across the country.
So we have 4 seconds. I think it's a great question, and I think it's a long answer. Do you want to take a shot at that, or?
You could do that. I think you'd be in court for years, and I'm not sure you'd end up getting $1 out of it. I'm much more of a let's figure this out ourselves and not try to get money out of the platforms, because I think it's, like I said, it's a long battle that I don't know is going to help people in this room particularly much. So I think we keep trying to work the problem out that we have now with sustainability, but I don't know. I've been in this business a long time, and yes, obviously the platforms ate up a lot of the revenue that was out there. But I mean, if we're being completely honest here, we watched them do it. We had the opportunity to protect that revenue, and we didn't do it in the early days of the internet. So I guess I'm not as much of a believer that the answer is to just try to soak the platforms. I think like the people in this room are among the people trying to figure out how journalism looks 10 years from now, and I think it's a lot better that we do this ourselves and not have them as boogeymen.
I wanted to close with the following thought. As I was catching up on the news between sessions here, I learned that the world's richest guy has bought the world's most powerful news and political information service, Elon Musk and Twitter. And that brings to mind the notion that news should be owned, controlled, and funded philanthropically, commercially, selflessly, not for business, political, or ego purposes. And some of the people that best embody that notion are the Ford Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Arnolds, and the American Journalism Project. So on this particular day, I wanted to say thank you.